3 years after my mother died, she sent me a voice message. I know how impossible that sounds. If someone else told me this story, I'd assume they were lying, grieving, or losing their mind. The truth is, for a long time, I thought I was losing mine too. But what happened over the next few weeks changed everything I believed about death, technology, and the things that might exist somewhere in between. The message arrived at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I remember the time because I had been awake studying for an economics exam. My apartment was silent except for the hum of my laptop and the rain tapping softly against the window. I was halfway through a chapter when my phone vibrated beside me. At first I ignored it, assuming it was some late-night spam notification. Then I glanced down and saw the sender's name. Mom. My heart immediately stopped. Not unknown number, not some random contact. It was my mother's contact, the same one that had remained in my phone for 3 years after her death, the same number that had been disconnected shortly after her funeral, the same contact I could never bring myself to delete. Attached was a voice message, 17 seconds long. My first thought was that somebody was playing a prank. Maybe one of my friends had somehow accessed old recordings. Maybe it was an AI-generated imitation. Technology could do almost anything now. There had to be a logical explanation. Still, my hands were shaking as I pressed play. For a moment there was only silence. Then I heard her voice. Daniel. The sound hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't just similar to my mother's voice. It was her voice. Every tiny detail was there. The softness in her tone, the slight rasp she'd developed after years of teaching, the way she stretched certain words whenever she worried about me. I hadn't heard that voice in 3 years, yet I recognized it instantly. Daniel, don't take Oak Street tomorrow morning. Please, take the highway instead. The recording ended. That was it. 17 seconds. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the phone. My entire body felt numb. I replayed the message. Then I played it again. And again. Every time it sounded exactly the same. My mother had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. I had attended the funeral. I had stood beside her grave. I'd spent years learning how to live with the absence she left behind. Yet somehow her voice had just spoken to me through my phone. By sunrise, I had convinced myself it was fake. It had to be. There was simply no other explanation. Then I remembered something strange. Nobody knew I drove through Oak Street every morning. Most students used the highway because it was faster. I took Oak Street because there was a small bakery there that my mother loved when I was a kid. Passing it each morning made me feel close to her. I'd never mentioned that habit to anyone. Yet the voice message specifically warned me about Oak Street. That detail sat in the back of my mind as I got dressed and left for campus. When I reached my car, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to follow the warning. Another part felt ridiculous for even considering it. Dead people didn't send messages. Ghosts didn't use smartphones. I started the engine and headed toward Oak Street. About 10 minutes later, traffic suddenly stopped. At first, I assumed it was construction. Then I noticed flashing lights in the distance. Police cars, ambulances, fire trucks. A terrible accident had happened less than half an hour earlier. A delivery truck had lost control on the rain-soaked road and smashed into several vehicles at the exact intersection I normally pass through. The road was completely blocked. Emergency workers were still pulling people from the wreckage. I felt my stomach drop. If I had left home a little earlier, I would have reached that intersection at precisely the wrong moment, exactly where the collision occurred, exactly where the voice message had warned me not to be. The drive back home felt unreal. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I skipped classes that day and spent hours listening to the recording over and over again. The more I listened, the more impossible it felt. There were tiny details that shouldn't have existed in an AI-generated recording. Soft breathing, faint background noises, the subtle echo of a room. It sounded like a real person speaking into a phone. That night I barely slept. At exactly 2:17 a.m., another notification appeared. A second voice message. This one was 22 seconds long. My pulse hammered in my ears as I pressed play. Daniel, my mother's voice said, Lock your kitchen window before bed. I immediately stood up. The kitchen window was already closed, so I almost ignored the warning. Then I checked the latch. It wasn't fully locked. Someone could have pushed it open from outside. A strange feeling settled over me. I locked it and checked it twice before returning to bed. Nothing happened that night. No intruders, no noises, no explanation. Just another warning that seemed oddly specific. The following day, I visited my best friend Marcus. If anyone could explain what was happening, it was him. Marcus studied computer science and spent most of his life investigating software, networks, and security systems. After listening to the recording several times, he looked visibly uncomfortable. That's creepy. That's not helpful. I'm serious, he said. This sounds authentic. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? I mean, if somebody used AI to recreate her voice, they had access to an insane amount of audio data. Marcus spent nearly half an hour trying to trace the source of the messages. When he finally turned his laptop toward me, his expression had completely changed. The number doesn't exist. I frowned. What do you mean it doesn't exist? I mean there's no registered provider, no active carrier, no routing information, nothing. According to the network records, these messages shouldn't even be possible. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than any answer. The messages continued. Every night at 2:17. Every night a new warning. Sometimes the warnings seemed small. Take your umbrella tomorrow. Other times they were disturbingly specific. Don't use elevator 3 after lunch. Every single prediction came true. The umbrella saved me from getting caught in a sudden storm that flooded half the city. Elevator 3 malfunctioned less than an hour after I would normally have used it. As the days passed, my fear slowly transformed into something else. Dependence. I started waiting for the messages, looking forward to them, trusting them. My life became strangely safer. It felt as though someone was guiding me around danger before it could happen. Then, something changed. One night, after a warning had helped me avoid a convenience store robbery, I sat alone in my apartment listening to the recording. Without really thinking, I whispered, "Mom?" The room remained silent. I felt ridiculous immediately. Then my phone vibrated. A new voice message arrived instantly. Not at 2:17, not scheduled, immediately. My hands shook as I opened it. The recording was only 6 seconds long. I pressed play. Yes, Daniel. I nearly dropped my phone. Every muscle in my body locked up. She had answered me, not warned me, not predicted anything, answered me, as though she had heard my voice. Sleep became impossible after that. The next morning I drove to the cemetery where she was buried. Clouds drifted slowly across the sky as I stood beside her grave. The grass swayed gently in the wind. For several minutes I simply stared at the headstone. Then I finally spoke. "Is this really you?" The question sounded foolish the moment it left my mouth. Nothing happened. No signs, no voices, no answers, only silence. When I returned home later that evening, another message was waiting. This time there was no warning, no prediction, no advice, just my mother's voice, soft and gentle. "You're working too hard, sweetheart." The tears came instantly. Sweetheart, and that was what she used to call me. Nobody else did. The recording continued. "You don't have to carry everything alone." Years of grief hit me all at once. Every missed birthday, every holiday, every achievement I wished she could have seen, every moment I wanted to call her and couldn't. For nearly an hour I sat on the floor replaying that recording. It felt like getting a tiny piece of her back. And that was exactly why I didn't notice the danger. Because when someone gives you what you've missed most in the world, you stop asking questions. 3 days later, another message arrived. This one was different, 34 seconds long, the longest recording yet. The moment I pressed play, I knew something was wrong. Static filled the speaker. Then my mother's voice emerged through the distortion. She sounded frightened, not worried, terrified. "Daniel, listen carefully." My heart began racing. "You need to stop replying." I sat upright. The voice continued. "If another message arrives after tonight, don't answer it." A chill crawled down my spine. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. The static grew louder. For a moment I could barely hear her. Then she spoke one final sentence, a sentence that changed everything. "That isn't me anymore." The recording crackled violently. Then her voice returned one last time. "Something else learned my voice." The message ended. The apartment fell completely silent. I stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to think, unable to breathe. Then, right in front of me, another notification appeared, a brand new voice message. From Mom, 47 seconds long, waiting to be played. And for the first time since the messages began, I was terrified to hear what was on the other side. I stared at the notification for nearly a minute. The new voice message sat on my screen like a loaded gun. 47 seconds, waiting. My mother's final warning echoed in my head. That isn't me anymore. Something else learned my voice. Every instinct told me not to play it. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it wears the face of someone you love. My finger hovered over the screen. Then I pressed play. For several seconds, there was only silence. No breathing, no static, nothing. Then, my mother's voice spoke. "Daniel." The tone was wrong. It sounded identical to her, perfectly identical. Yet something beneath the words felt unnatural. Like hearing a song played backward. The notes were correct. The feeling wasn't. "I know what she told you." My blood turned cold. The voice continued. "She's confused." I immediately paused the recording. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. How could it know about the previous message? I hadn't told anyone. The recording had been on my phone. Nobody else had heard it. My hands shook as I resumed playback. "Don't be afraid," the voice said softly. "I've always been here. I've always been helping you." The message ended with a sentence that haunted me for weeks. "You need me more than you realize." I deleted the recording immediately. 5 seconds later, it reappeared. Same sender, same length, as if it had never been removed. That was the moment I stopped thinking this was some elaborate technological prank. Something impossible was happening. The next morning, I called Marcus. After hearing everything, he drove straight to my apartment. For 6 hours, we tested my phone. We disconnected it from the internet, removed the SIM card, factory reset the device. Nothing worked. The messages remained. Even worse, they now appeared on other devices. My tablet, my laptop, a spare phone I'd bought 2 years earlier. At exactly 2:17 p.m. that afternoon, every screen in my apartment lit up simultaneously. A new message from Mom. Marcus went pale. Neither of us touched it. A few moments later, the message disappeared on its own. Marcus packed up his equipment and stood. "I don't know what this is." That frightened me more than anything. Marcus always knew something, always had an explanation, not this time. Before leaving, he hesitated near the door. Then he said something strange. "When was the last time you dreamed about your mom before all this started?" I frowned. "I don't know. Months maybe." "That's weird." "Why?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Because you've mentioned her every day since the messages started." I stared at him. So? So that's exactly what whoever, or whatever, is sending these messages wants. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. That night I decided to do something I should have done weeks earlier. I went through my mother's belongings. Most of her things were stored in boxes in a closet. I rarely opened them. The grief was still too painful. Hours passed as I sorted through old photographs, letters, notebooks, and documents. Near midnight, I found something unexpected. A journal, one I'd never seen before. The cover was worn. Several pages had fallen loose. Most entries were ordinary. Work stress, family memories, random thoughts. Then I reached entries written shortly before her death, and everything changed. The first entry mentioned strange phone calls. The second mentioned hearing her own voice speaking from an empty room. By the third entry, her handwriting had become shaky, almost panicked. I read every word. Something has been imitating people. It started with voices, then dreams. Now it's appearing in reflections. My pulse quickened. The entries continued. Apparently, 6 months before her accident, several people in her town had reported hearing messages from deceased relatives. The incidents were never reported publicly. Most victims refused to discuss them. A few disappeared. One had committed suicide. My mother had investigated because one of the victims was a colleague from school. The final pages were the most disturbing. She had written repeatedly about something she called the echo, not because she knew what it was, because that was the only name survivors had given it. According to her notes, the echo copied people, not just voices, memories, emotions, personal details, everything. It learned individuals so completely that victims couldn't distinguish the imitation from the real person. The last journal entry was dated 3 days before her death. Only one sentence filled the page. "If anything happens to me, Daniel must never answer." I stared at those words until my vision blurred. Then my phone vibrated. 2:17 a.m. Another message. I didn't open it. A second notification appeared, then a third, then a fourth. By morning, there were 27 unread voice messages, all from Mom. I spent the entire day ignoring them. By evening, something strange began happening. People started acting differently around me. A classmate greeted me and casually mentioned seeing me at a coffee shop that morning. The problem was that I'd never gone there. My landlord asked whether my mother was visiting. When I asked what he meant, he looked confused. "I saw her in the hallway yesterday." My stomach dropped. The sightings increased. Neighbors, students, strangers, they all claimed to have seen my mother. Always briefly, always at a distance, always watching. That night I barely slept. At 2:17 a.m., a loud knock echoed through the apartment. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate. My heart nearly exploded. Nobody visited at that hour. The knocking came again. 3 more knocks, then silence. I crept toward the door. Against every survival instinct, I looked through the peephole. A woman stood in the hallway, my mother, exactly as she looked before she died. Same hair, same clothes, same face, same eyes. For several horrifying seconds, she stared directly at the peephole. Then she smiled. Not my mother's smile. Something wearing it. I stumbled backward. The knocking immediately stopped. When I looked again, the hallway was empty. I left the apartment before sunrise and drove straight to Marcus's house. After hearing everything, he became unusually quiet. Then he opened his laptop. I found something. On the screen was a collection of news articles, different countries, different years, different victims, yet every story followed the same pattern. Messages from dead relatives, accurate predictions, growing dependence, physical appearances, then disappearance. Nobody knew what happened afterward. The trail simply ended. Marcus leaned forward. The thing copies people by creating emotional attachment. I swallowed. What happens when it finishes copying? Neither of us spoke. We both already knew the answer. That evening, we returned to my apartment. Marcus believed the messages were somehow acting like an invitation, a connection. The more I interacted, the stronger the imitation became. We decided to test a theory. At exactly 2:17 a.m., another message arrived. For the first time in weeks, I played one. The voice immediately spoke. "Daniel." I said nothing. "Daniel, please." Still nothing. Several seconds passed, then the voice changed. Not gradually, instantly. My mother's tone vanished. What replaced it was something ancient, something cold, something that sounded wrong in a way words can't properly describe. The speaker crackled. A low, distorted voice emerged. "You were lonely. The room temperature seemed to drop. You invited me." Marcus visibly froze. The voice continued. "I only gave you what you wanted." Every screen in the apartment suddenly turned on. Televisions, phones, laptops, all displaying the same message. A photograph of my mother smiling. Then every image slowly began changing. Her smile stretched unnaturally. Her eyes darkened, her face distorted. Not violently, subtly. As if something underneath was struggling to wear her skin. The voice returned. "You miss her?" The lights flickered. "You would have chosen me eventually." Then every device went black. The silence afterward felt overwhelming. Marcus finally whispered, "I think it needs permission." What? It can imitate, it can influence, but it can't fully replace someone unless they're invited. The realization hit me immediately. Every warning, every helpful prediction, every comforting message. It wasn't trying to hurt me, not yet. It was earning trust, building dependence, making me choose it willingly. The thing had spent weeks becoming the person I missed most in the world. Because nobody opens the door for a monster, but they might open it for their mother. The final confrontation happened 3 nights later, at exactly 2:17 a.m. Every device activated simultaneously. One final message appeared. This time there was no voice recording, only text, a single sentence. "Let me in." The lights throughout the apartment died. Darkness swallowed everything. Then I heard footsteps, slow footsteps, approaching from the hallway. The same hallway where I'd seen my mother's face. The footsteps stopped outside the apartment. Silence followed. Then my mother's voice spoke through the door. Not from a phone, not from a speaker, directly from the other side. "Daniel." Tears immediately filled my eyes. For a brief moment, every memory came rushing back. Birthdays, family dinners, bedtime stories, the sound of her laughter. I wanted it to be her. God, I wanted it to be her. The voice spoke again. "Please." The doorknob slowly turned. My entire body trembled. Then I remembered the journal, the warning, the final message she had left behind. "If anything happens to me, Daniel must never answer." I stepped forward, looked directly at the door, and spoke. "No." The hallway became silent. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a scream erupted from the other side. Not human, not animal, something much worse. The entire building shook. Every light exploded, every screen shattered, and the scream transformed into thousands of overlapping voices. Men, women, children, all speaking at once. Then everything stopped, instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. The next morning, every message was gone. Every recording, every notification, every trace. Even the contact named Mom had disappeared from my phone. Months have passed since then. Life has mostly returned to normal. Mostly. Sometimes I still miss her. Sometimes I still wish I could hear her voice one more time. But I understand something now that I didn't understand before. Grief creates doors. Loneliness leaves them unlocked. And not everything that answers when we call for the dead is actually listening out of love. A few weeks ago, I visited my mother's grave again. As I stood there, the wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Then I noticed something resting beside the headstone, a small folded piece of paper. There was no name, no date, just 6 handwritten words. Words written in my mother's handwriting, words that still keep me awake at night. "You finally heard the right voice." If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.